Swilad anathron amalhalla itham lai mechenin, im Lamaeron anathon ingolthor lin elam thindrim, thi menatham aningeliad lemui huin. In today's lesson, we will cover how to form plural nouns in Sindarin. First of all, let's go over the basics. The primary way to form the plural in Sindarin is by changing the vowels of a word. The easiest way to understand how this works is by first understanding how vowels are produced. Vowels typically have three basic properties: height, whether the tongue is high or low, such as E versus R; backness, whether the tongue is at the front of the mouth or the back of the mouth, such as U versus U; and roundness, whether the lips are rounded or flat, such as E versus U. Using these three properties, we can create the following vowel chart for Sindarin. Historically, the plural in Sindarin was formed by attaching a suffix, e, to the end of a noun. Eventually, this suffix disappeared, but it left traces in the other vowels of plural nouns. If we look at the properties of the vowel e, you can get an idea of how these traces influence the other vowels. E is a high front vowel, so naturally it would raise in front in other vowels in some way. This is how the plural is formed in Sindarin. It should be noted that how exactly a vowel is affected depends on its position in a word, as well as several other historical factors that will be covered later in the video. First, let's go over the most regular patterns. For the vowel R, if it is in the final syllable of a word, it becomes the diphthong I. Otherwise, it is raised and becomes the vowel E. For example, Aran becomes Erain. Lavan becomes Levain. Tal becomes Tail. Kant becomes Kaint. For the vowel E, if it is in the final syllable of a word, it is raised and becomes the vowel E. Otherwise, it remains unchanged. For example, Edel becomes Edil. Lalvin becomes Lalvin. Hen becomes Hin. Teo becomes Tiu. The vowel E naturally remains unchanged. For example, Dis remains Dis, and Sigir remains Sigir. The vowel O is fronted and raised if it is in the final syllable of a word, it becomes the vowel U. Otherwise, it is fronted and becomes the vowel E. For example, Onot becomes Enut. Amon becomes Emun. Orch becomes Urch. And Kevurf becomes Kevurf. The vowel U is fronted to the vowel U if it is in the final syllable. If it is a long U, however, then it becomes the diphthong UI. Otherwise, the vowel U becomes U. For example, Tulus becomes Tulus, and Dur becomes Duir. Lastly, the vowel U remains unchanged. For example, Ulf remains Ulf, and Mul remains Mul. Let's take another look at the vowel chart of Sindarin and map out the changes undertaken by each vowel in final syllables and non-final syllables. Next, we move on from single vowels to combinations of vowels, otherwise known as diphthongs. The diphthongs I, and oi remain unchanged in the plural forms of words. The diphthong au is raised to oe. For example, nauk becomes noek, rau becomes roe, now becomes noe. The vowel combination ie becomes I, and the combination io becomes u. For example, yel becomes il, eirien becomes eirin, yon becomes un, kirion becomes kirun. Next we move on to the exceptions. And believe me when I say, there are a lot of exceptions. The first exception involves the vowel R. Namely, R becomes A when followed by a consonant cluster. The only exception is a cluster starting with L, where R becomes A. For example, narn becomes nern, fang becomes feng, alf becomes elf. In some cases, where the vowel O in a non-final syllable was historically a long R, the vowel O remains unchanged. For example, roval becomes rovail, odel becomes odil. As mentioned above, the diphthong I usually remains unchanged in plural forms. There are, however, instances where I might change to a long E or U in some words. This results from the vowel being influenced by a historical Y sound later in the word that is no longer present. For example, fire becomes fir, kair becomes kir, fire becomes fyr. In some cases, where you have the vowel O in the final syllable, it remains unchanged in the plural form. This is due to the fact that such words originally had no vowel in that place and ended in a consonant cluster ending in L or R. Later on, long after the development of the vowel changes in plural forms, a vowel O was inserted to break up such consonant clusters and thus remained unaffected by the plural vowel changes. For example, dagur becomes degur, magol becomes meigol, glamour becomes glamour, hathol becomes hathol. An exception where the consonant cluster was originally LGH, the GH turned into the vowel R in the singular and the vowel E in the plural, resulting in the following words with their plural forms: Thela, Phili, Thela, Thili. Lastly, there are a group of words whose plurals seem particularly unusual. Some words in Sindarin that historically had two syllables and ended in a consonant lost that final consonant, leaving them with a final vowel. That final vowel, however, was also lost, making the word one syllable, and the main vowel of that one syllable became long. But do you remember the historical plural suffix e I mentioned at the beginning of the lesson? Well, historically, by adding this suffix to one of these words, it no longer ended in a consonant, and so the consonant was not lost, and only the suffix e was lost with the loss of word final vowels. Therefore, such words in modern Sindarin are single-syllable words in their singular form, but become two syllables in their plural form, with the second syllable consisting of the historical ghost vowel and ghost consonant that were lost in the singular form. Here are some examples of such words alongside their plural forms. Elin, Nel, Nelik, Aelin, Thor, Therun. I will now provide you with a list of nouns in their singular form. I want you to take each noun and make it plural. In the cases where irregularities may be present, I will mark it accordingly. Go ahead and pause the video and take as much time as you need. Lin hannon antiriad, teitho anini mebedid lin, analu e govened win, noer.